I remember the moment vividly. The fluorescent lights in the lobby reflected off the polished marble floor, highlighting every inch of the building I had been walking past for years. And yet, here I was, in a janitor uniform, being stared at as if I had committed a crime, my hair tied back, a mop in one hand, a bucket in the other. I was invisible to everyone who mattered, except for their smirks. The receptionist, a young woman with perfect nails and a smug smile, didn't even bother to hide her disdain. "You're really here again," she said, almost laughing. I forced a polite nod and continued sweeping. I'd learned long ago that defending myself wouldn't do any good. People like her thrived on looking down at anyone they considered beneath them. I heard whispers behind my back, people talking about the janitor who thinks she belongs here. They laughed when I tripped over the edge of a carpet, or when I spilled a little water while mopping. Every small mistake became fuel for their amusement. My chest tightened with every giggle. My hands gripped the mop harder, and I reminded myself to stay calm. Let them laugh. They had no idea who I really was. It wasn't just strangers. Even people I had once worked alongside, in the offices above me, treated me as a joke. I'd started here years ago in a low-level corporate role, bright-eyed and eager, but after a series of bad decisions and budget cuts, I'd been demoted, or rather, pushed down the ladder, until the janitor role was all I could hold. And still, I came every day, working quietly, observing, learning, and plotting. I moved from floor to floor, emptying trash cans, wiping windows, making sure the lobby sparkled. They laughed when I polished the brass handles like they were priceless artifacts. They didn't know that every smirk, every condescending word only fueled me further. I began to treat their mockery like a currency, depositing it into my bank of patience, strategy, and resolve. One particularly arrogant man, a middle manager with a permanently condescending tone, leaned against the railing as I swept the floors below. "Isn't that the janitor?" he said loudly enough for the group around him to hear. "I wonder how she feels pretending to work in a building she'll never own." The group laughed, and I froze just for a second, feeling that familiar sting of humiliation. But instead of letting the comment break me, I smiled to myself, just a small curve of lips no one could see. Oh, I would own it. And they wouldn't just regret mocking me, they would wish they'd never underestimated me. That man had no idea that every time he laughed, he was unknowingly motivating me. Every snide comment, every eye roll, every whispered insult was another brick in the foundation I was building. My foundation for revenge, for vindication, for triumph. By the time the evening came, I had finished my rounds and retreated to the small office space tucked away in the basement. Here, the mop was replaced by blueprints, financial documents, and spreadsheets. I reviewed plans for acquisitions, investments, and strategic moves that would one day put me in control of every inch of this building. I had started with small investments in the property market, quietly buying shares, corners of the buildings, and forgotten units. No one noticed me then. They only saw a janitor, but behind the uniform, a plan was taking shape. I recalled the day I first decided I would take ownership of the building. It had been a humiliating moment, a meeting with the same arrogant manager who had mocked me. "You'll never belong here," he had said, sipping his overpriced latte as if the world owed him something. I had smiled politely, but inside, a fire ignited. One day I would walk through this lobby, no mop in hand, no uniform to hide behind, and they would all bow to me in recognition, not of my wealth, but of my power and strategy. That night, after everyone had left and the building was quiet, I stood at the top of the elevator shaft, looking down at the lobby I had cleaned countless times. I imagined walking in wearing a tailored suit, commanding the attention and respect of everyone who had mocked me. I imagined their faces, the shock, the disbelief, the humiliation, as they realized that the person they laughed at had quietly built an empire right under their noses. The janitor uniform I wore was no longer a symbol of shame. It had become my armor, my disguise, my secret advantage. While they thought they were laughing at me, I was learning, planning, and preparing. Every day spent mopping floors, emptying trash, and fixing leaks was also a day spent observing the weaknesses of the tenants, the flaws in management, and the gaps in ownership. Every joke, every insult, every dismissive glance was meticulously recorded in my mind. I wasn't just surviving, I was strategizing. By the time the sun set and the lobby emptied, I was no longer just a janitor. I was a silent force, invisible yet powerful, moving through the building like a shadow, gathering information, and quietly expanding my investments. I knew the day would come when the uniform would come off, when the mop would be replaced by authority, and when the laughter would turn to awe. And I promised myself that day would be unforgettable, not just for me, but for every person who had dared to mock me. Morning came quietly in the building, and with it, the same routine of sneers, whispers, and silent judgments. But for me, it was another opportunity. While everyone else was busy living in their comfortable ignorance, I was already steps ahead, mentally charting the moves I would need to take to turn their laughter into my victory. Each insult from the staff became a piece of data, each eye roll a sign of the arrogance I would one day dismantle. I started using my position to observe everything, every tenant, every lease, every minor complaint filed to management. They thought I was just sweeping floors and emptying trash cans. They didn't realize that I had memorized who owed what, which units were underperforming, and which managers were slipping in their duties. My notebook, tucked carefully into the janitor closet, was filled with names, numbers, and observations, like a blueprint for conquest. By lunchtime, I had completed my rounds and retreated to my basement hideout, a small office space no one suspected existed. Here, surrounded by spreadsheets, property deeds, and architectural plans, I transitioned from the janitor they mocked to the strategist they would one day fear. I mapped the building in meticulous detail, noting the corners that were undervalued, the units ripe for acquisition, and the tenants who could become either allies or obstacles. Every detail mattered. Every corner, every lease, every complaint was a puzzle piece for the empire I intended to build. I recalled the first time I bought a small corner unit in this very building. It had been overlooked by everyone else, dismissed as too insignificant to matter. The manager laughed when I inquired about the price. "That unit? No one even wants it," he said. "Why bother?" I smiled politely and left, closing the deal quietly the next day, while everyone continued to see me as a janitor. That moment had felt exhilarating, the taste of power masked behind anonymity. It had been a small step, but one that would eventually snowball into something much larger. It turned into months, and I continued to execute my hidden strategy. I attended the financial seminars at night, read property reports, and studied market trends. The world above the lobby had its rules: expensive suits, polished shoes, and flashy cars. But the real game was played in numbers, negotiations, and foresight. I was learning it all, under the radar, while everyone else underestimated me. Their laughter became my guidepost, marking the areas I needed to master. One day, while cleaning an office on the 5th floor, I overheard a heated discussion between two managers about the potential sale of one of the building's prime floors. Their arrogance and negligence were evident. They had no idea what they were discussing, or the real value of the property. I quietly took notes, memorizing the figures and the weaknesses in their approach. I realized then that I didn't need to confront them directly. The building was full of people who underestimated numbers as much as they underestimated me. And numbers don't lie. At night, after finishing my janitorial rounds, I would sit with financial statements, reviewing my investments and looking for opportunities to expand. I had quietly acquired several undervalued units, and my portfolio was growing. Each acquisition was small, almost invisible to the outside world, but in aggregate, it was building power, silent power, the kind that eventually forces respect. Every time I looked at the pile of deeds on my desk, I felt the thrill of knowing I was constructing an empire while they laughed at my uniform. The contrast between my humble exterior and my ambitious mind was stark. During the day, I wore the janitor uniform with its faded fabric and scuffed shoes. But at night, I became a visionary, an investor, a strategist, someone they could never have imagined hiding beneath the mop and bucket. I learned to separate perception from reality, understanding that their mockery only proved how little they truly understood the value of intelligence, patience, and foresight. Months later, a rare opportunity arose. The building's owner, an elderly man disconnected from daily operations, hinted at selling parts of the property. Rumors swirled through the offices and among tenants. Managers speculated and made reckless offers. I listened and waited, having already positioned myself to act swiftly. While others argued and undervalued the opportunities, I quietly moved, securing key units and rights of first refusal. It was exhilarating. The power of patience, the satisfaction of invisible victory. Every move brought me closer to a position where no one could ignore me. By the end of the year, my investments had grown exponentially. I had control over multiple floors, and my understanding of the building's operations was unmatched. I had even developed relationships with contractors, tenants, and minor investors, creating a network of alliances that further strengthened my position. Meanwhile, the managers continued to mock me, unaware that the janitor they ridiculed was now quietly orchestrating a takeover. Every day, they bragged about their accomplishments, oblivious to the fact that their empire was slipping from their control. One evening, as I returned from yet another seminar on real estate law and investment strategy, I paused in the lobby and looked at the group of laughing managers. Their voices echoed off the walls, dismissing me as they had always done. I felt a quiet satisfaction. They didn't realize that the uniform wasn't a limitation. It was my camouflage. And soon, that camouflage would be gone, replaced by the authority they had scorned. I imagined the moment when I would walk past them, no mop in hand, commanding the respect I had earned. Their faces frozen in shock would be my ultimate reward. The months of meticulous planning, careful investment, and quiet observation had led me to a tipping point. I had the money, the leverage, and the strategic knowledge to transform from the laughed-at janitor into the owner of the building itself. I smiled to myself, realizing that their mockery had only been the spark I needed. The journey had been long, the sacrifices immense, but the foundation was solid. I was ready. As I wiped down the final windows of the day, I glanced at my reflection in the glass. For the first time, I didn't see a janitor. I saw a leader. I saw power, strategy, and inevitability. One day, they would all realize their mistake. The day I walked in not to clean, but to command. And when that day came, every laugh, every insult, every condescending glance would rebound upon them. I was no longer a victim. I was a force they had never anticipated. The morning was crisp, and the air inside the building felt charged with the usual energy of complacent managers and self-important tenants. They bustled about, confident in their routines, oblivious to the quiet storm gathering beneath their noses. I walked through the lobby in my janitor uniform, the same faded gray that had earned countless sneers, but today, I wore a different expression. A calm determination that no one could read. I had spent months preparing, lining up investors, securing the remaining units, and ensuring every piece of the building's puzzle was under my control. It was meticulous work, a careful orchestration of timing, leverage, and patience. Each contract signed, each agreement sealed, brought me one step closer to a reality they could never imagine. A reality where the janitor they mocked would become their ultimate authority. By mid-morning, I made my way to the leasing office under the guise of delivering supplies. The staff barely looked up, laughing quietly at my uniform as they often did. Little did they know, I held the leverage they had spent years underestimating. The papers tucked under my arm were not cleaning logs. They were final acquisition agreements, contracts giving me control over the last significant unit and granting me authority over building operations. Their laughter, so familiar, now felt hollow, almost pitiful. I spent the day observing, taking mental notes of the power dynamic, noting who controlled which tenants and who had influence over decisions. The managers were predictable, arrogant, careless, and overconfident. Each time they dismissed me or ignored my presence, it reinforced the knowledge that their underestimation was my secret weapon. I smiled quietly to myself. The more they mocked, the more blind they became to the storm approaching. Late in the afternoon, I convened a discreet meeting with my legal team and financial advisors in a small office space I had rented nearby. The discussion was precise, focused on timing, legalities, and strategy. Every step had to be flawless. Any miscalculation could expose my plan prematurely. I could feel the tension in the air, the same tension I imagined would sweep through the building when the day of reckoning arrived. We reviewed every clause, every contingency, and every communication that would officially transfer control. That evening, I returned to my janitor duties, blending seamlessly with the background. The managers, as usual, waved at me condescendingly, dismissing me with gestures and jokes. I nodded politely, maintaining the illusion of humility. They had no idea that each casual remark, every laugh, only fueled the fire that would soon engulf them. I had learned a crucial lesson over months of observation. Power isn't announced. It's accumulated silently, like water collecting behind a dam, waiting for the precise moment to surge. By nightfall, I had finished my rounds, carefully locking away the contracts and financial statements. My heart raced, not with fear, but with anticipation. The moment of confrontation was nearing, and every careful step I had taken over the past year was about to pay off. I thought about the faces of those who had mocked me, the smirks, the whispers, the dismissive glances. Soon, all of it would be reversed. Their arrogance would crumble under the weight of my strategy. The next morning, I arrived in the lobby as usual, but with a subtle shift in purpose. I carried a briefcase alongside my cleaning supplies, a symbol, unnoticed by all, of the transformation I was orchestrating. Managers gathered near the entrance, discussing trivial matters and congratulating each other on perceived successes. I passed them silently, the weight of unseen authority settling into my chest. They still did not recognize that the janitor beneath their ridicule had quietly acquired enough control to dictate their fate. Midday brought the first tangible result. One of the managers received an urgent notice regarding an overdue lease and maintenance issues. Normally, such messages were handled with casual neglect, but this time, it came with my signature as the building's legal authority. Confusion rippled through the office. The manager's face turned pale, and he muttered under his breath, glancing at his colleagues with panic. I smiled internally. The first cracks were appearing. As the afternoon progressed, I subtly escalated my control, sending formal notices, making calls, and confirming agreements that finalized my position as the majority stakeholder. I could hear the whispered questions, the anxious murmurs among the staff, as they began to realize that something significant was unfolding. Still, no one suspected the janitor. The uniform remained a mask, a tool of deception that concealed the power I had quietly amassed. Finally, the moment arrived. I requested a meeting with all the managers in the main office. The room buzzed with anticipation, though they had no idea why. As I stepped forward, briefcase in hand and uniform partially covered by a clean jacket, the room fell silent. The leader among them, Mr. Grayson, looked up with a smirk, expecting a casual report, or perhaps another routine complaint. He had no idea that he was about to witness the complete inversion of power. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, commanding attention. "I believe it's time to clarify a few details regarding the ownership and management of this building." I opened my briefcase, revealing a stack of legal documents, contracts, and official correspondence. Eyes widened, jaws slackened, and a palpable tension filled the room. This was the culmination of months of silent maneuvering. Every observation, every acquisition, every unnoticed effort coalescing into a single, undeniable fact. I now controlled the building. Shock and disbelief rippled through the managers. What?" Mr. Grayson stammered, his authoritative tone faltering as he glanced at the documents. "How is this possible?" I smiled, calmly placing the papers on the table. "It's possible because while you were busy mocking the janitor, I was quietly building the foundation of control. Every lease, every unit, every overlooked detail has been meticulously secured. The building you thought you managed is now under my authority." The room was silent for a long moment, each individual processing the revelation. Faces that had been accustomed to dominance, sneers, and ridicule were now painted with astonishment and fear. The irony was delicious. The same individuals who had laughed at my uniform and dismissed my presence now faced the stark reality that their positions were subject to my control. "This is your official notice," I continued, my voice steady and unwavering. "Effective immediately, all management decisions, approvals, and oversight will pass through my office. Any actions that disregard these directives will be considered insubordination and addressed accordingly." I watched as the realization sank in. The laughter had evaporated, replaced by disbelief, tension, and the first traces of respect, or perhaps fear. The next morning, the building buzzed with an unusual energy. Managers whispered in corners, tenants glanced nervously at the front desk, and even the security staff moved with a heightened sense of alertness. They all felt the invisible shift in power, though no one had yet seen the full scope of the change. I arrived as usual in my janitor uniform, the same guise that had earned me endless ridicule, but this time, it served as a mask for the authority I now wielded. I moved through the lobby with purpose, every step measured, every glance precise. The staff greeted me cautiously, unsure whether to maintain their usual jokes or tread carefully. I allowed a small smile, not mocking but knowing, to form on my lip. Today, the final act of my long-awaited plan would unfold. This was the day they would realize that the janitor they had mocked and overlooked was the one who now held the reins of the building. I made my way to the main office, the hub of managerial activity. The managers were already gathered, nervously discussing the recent notices and changes. Their arrogance had evaporated, replaced by tension and uncertainty. They looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and disbelief, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. I carried nothing but a small folder in my hand, a simple envelope that contained the legal documents formalizing my complete authority over the building. "Good morning, everyone," I began, my voice calm but commanding attention. The room went silent. "I believe it's time for a full disclosure regarding the ownership and management of this building." I opened the envelope and laid the papers on the table. "Effective immediately, I am the sole owner and CEO of this property." Filled the room. Mr. Grayson, the head manager, took a step back, his face pale and his usual confidence shattered. "This isn't possible," he stammered. "You, a janitor?" His voice trailed off, his disbelief echoing through the office. He could barely comprehend that the person he had mocked daily had orchestrated the ultimate takeover. I walked slowly around the room, observing their reactions. Each manager shifted uncomfortably, their faces betraying the mixture of fear, regret, and astonishment. "While you were busy mocking the uniform," I continued, "I was quietly securing every lease, negotiating every contract, and ensuring that every necessary legal and financial step was taken to gain control of this building. The irony," I said with a small, controlled smile, "is that the very mockery you employed only fueled my determination." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. The room was heavy with silence, punctuated only by the rustle of papers and the nervous shuffling of feet. Then I addressed the staff directly. "From this moment on, all decisions, approvals, and policies are under my authority. Any action that disregards these directives will be considered insubordination and addressed accordingly." Mr. Grayson's hands trembled as he reached for the documents, trying to make sense of the situation. "Why? How did this happen without anyone noticing?" he asked, his voice cracking. I gave him a steady look. "Because you underestimated me. Because you judged a person by their appearance, rather than their abilities. And because you ignored every opportunity to see beyond the uniform, beyond the perceived simplicity of my role." One by one, the other managers fell silent, the realization dawning on them. They had mocked, laughed, and dismissed me for years, but now the tables had turned completely. The janitor they had scorned was no longer someone to belittle. He, or rather I, controlled the building's future. The very foundation they had walked over daily was now under my command. I could see the fear and regret in their eyes, the smirks, the whispered jokes, the sneers. They were gone. Instead, there was awe, a hesitant respect forming in its place. I allowed a small, calm smile, not cruel, but firm, to cross my face. "Consider this a lesson in underestimation," I said, softly, letting the weight of my words sink in. "Never judge someone by appearances alone. Power is often quietly built, step by step, while arrogance blinds those who believe they are untouchable. Then I addressed the rest of the staff and tenants who had gathered, sensing the unusual tension. For the past months, you've seen changes in management and policies. You've likely felt uncertainty. Today, that uncertainty ends. My vision for this building is one of respect, integrity, and opportunity. Every individual here will be treated with fairness and dignity, and the culture of mockery and disdain is over. As I spoke, I saw the shift ripple through the room. Nervous murmurs turned into nods of agreement. Faces that had been clouded with anxiety now held glimmers of hope. They realized that the building was not just under new ownership, it was under leadership that valued competence, determination, and respect over appearances and social standing. Finally, I turned back to Mr. Grayson, who stood frozen, a shadow of the commanding presence he had once wielded. "You had your chance to respect those around you," I said calmly. "You chose arrogance and dismissal. Now, your role is simple. You will follow the directives of the new management, or you will find yourself without a place here." He swallowed hard, the reality of his position sinking in. The managers exchanged uneasy glances, understanding that their days of dominance were over. I had not only taken control, but had fundamentally shifted the culture of the building. The janitor who had been mocked was now the authority, the decision-maker, and the symbol of quiet, relentless determination. The day ended with a sense of calm triumph. I walked through the lobby one last time in my uniform, the same uniform that had once been a source of humiliation. This time, though, it represented strategy, patience, and victory. The building was mine, the staff was aligned under fair leadership, and the lessons of arrogance, underestimation, and respect were firmly cemented in every corner. As I stepped outside, the sun setting behind the skyline, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The journey had been long, silent, and meticulously planned, but the result was undeniable. From mockery to mastery, from overlooked janitor to building owner, I had transformed not only my role, but the lives of everyone in the building. Power had been quietly accumulated, respect had been demanded, and a lesson had been delivered in the most definitive way possible. And as the doors closed behind me, I smiled, knowing that the uniform, once a symbol of derision, had become a testament to the strength of patience, strategy, and relentless determination. The janitor was no longer the overlooked worker. She was the master of the building, and the mockery of the past had been replaced with the respect of the present.